Good morning, everyone. This is Tim Rose, the editor of AM. Can I welcome you to this webinar about a consumer focus on after-sales? In a moment, after my brief introduction, we've a couple of presenters for you from CDK Global, and also they're joined by a third colleague who will help to answer any questions that you have. So they'll comprise Michelle Mays, Marketing Communications Director, Curtis Blythe, the Customer Success Manager, and Paul Sargent will join the Q&A. He's the Implementation Consultant. So in a moment, they'll begin the presentation, but before they do, can I just remind you how you can get involved? You've joined us in a listen-only mode. However, on your screen in front of you, you should have a dialog box, maybe on the right-hand side, which you can type questions into. And we certainly encourage you to please take part, because after the presentation, we'll have about 15 minutes or so of Q&A with our presenters. So we really do encourage you to type in your questions and any comments you have while the webinar is live. So now that's enough for me. Over to the CDK team for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, everybody. My name's Michelle, and as Tim mentioned, I'm the Marketing Communications Director here at CDK Global, and I'm really looking forward to sharing the insights of our latest consumer research with you. So let's just have a quick look at the agenda for today. We're going to look first of all at the current trends that are impacting after-sales revenue. We're also going to look in depth at our quantitative consumer research and understand what can we learn from consumers about their expectations for communication in after-sales. We then followed this up with some qualitative research to make sure we heard from dealers in some of the markets that we interviewed. And lastly, Curtis is going to take us through what we can really learn from these results and tips and tricks for planning your own customer communication journey in the after-sales area. As Tim mentioned, we will then follow this on with a Q&A. So starting at the beginning then, we're just going to have a brief look at some of the macroeconomic trends which are impacting after-sales revenues in dealers at the moment. Although the automotive aftermarket industry is predicted to grow by 3% globally per annum, across Europe this growth is closer to 1%, and there are a few important trends that will impact this. Firstly, consumers are looking to automotive retailers to offer them the same kind of seamless, efficient, and digitally enabled customer experience that they've come to expect from other types of retail, not only in the showroom, but also in the after-sales area. They will expect digitalization, such as e-commerce options, and also increased price transparency in order to win their business. Secondly, the rising popularity of electric vehicles, driven not only by changing consumer preferences, but also by government legislation and tax benefits, will also impact the after-sales revenue potential, as of course these vehicles do require less maintenance than traditional petrol or diesel cars. Overall, automotive maintenance costs in the after-sales area for battery electric vehicles are expected to be approximately 40% lower than conventional combustion engine vehicles. Thirdly, research is indicating that the connected car will play a much more influential role in highlighting maintenance requirements to the driver. Predictive intelligence is already in use and will continue to evolve to recommend the specific servicing needs of that vehicle. Not only this, but research by McKinsey shows that if a car were to recommend a location for vehicle servicing, about 58% of consumers would follow its instruction. This may impact retailers' ability to attract customers and also to fill workshop appointments. Finally, the rise in shared mobility and subscription/on-demand services could really have an opposing effect. Whilst this may mean that less consumers are owning a car directly and outright, and therefore reducing the number of customers that a retailer could target, it's worth noting that these shared and on-demand vehicles are likely to have more wear and tear and therefore higher maintenance costs. So with the macroeconomic scene set, we wanted to ask the question to consumers: how could improved customer communication help increase after-sales revenue? So why did we commission this survey? Well, really for four main reasons. We wanted to understand the after-sales communication experiences between dealers and consumers across Europe, in the UAE, and also in China. From there, we hope to identify opportunities that are being missed to connect with consumers. And these missed opportunities, how could they then lead to missed opportunities to generate revenue? And lastly, we then looked into best practices from around the world, which we'll share with you towards the end. We asked 1,000 consumers per country, and the demographic was men and women aged 18 to 80 years old. And here's a quick look at all the different markets that we surveyed, 8 in total, as you can see. So moving on then to our findings. What was our first key finding and why was this important? The first thing we learned is that after the deal is done, and that really means after the car has been purchased, some customers are forgotten. So specifically, we asked consumers, since you bought your last car, how often do you hear from your current dealer? And then secondly, how relevant was the communication that was sent to you from that dealer? So let's start, if you will, with who we've nicknamed top of the class, China. And what we've found here is that a staggering 97.5% of consumers confirmed that they have heard from their dealer again after they've purchased their car. So that means only 2.5% of consumers are essentially escaping or getting away. The UAE also performed very well in this question, with only 12% in this market saying that they hadn't heard from their dealer again. But as we move across to Europe, we really start to paint a different picture. What we're finding here is on average, 1 in 3 car buyers have not heard from their dealer since they purchased their car. And in the UK specifically, this figure is 35.7% have never heard from their dealer again. So what does this mean? Well, if we were thinking about this in terms of maybe an online date, what we're finding is that too many consumers are really being ghosted by dealers. They buy the car from them, they have maybe a great experience there, but then they never hear from them again. So unsurprisingly, they're then starting to look elsewhere for other options for their vehicle maintenance. And of course, this leads to lost revenue opportunities for dealers, where traditionally the margins would be much higher in after-sales maintenance than they would be in new car sales. The second key finding for us was that there's an opportunity for digital as a channel to be much more widely adopted. So for our second key finding, we asked consumers, since buying your latest car, how has your dealer been in contact with you? Now, what we're finding here is that in Europe, it's really quite traditional. So 36% across Europe are using the telephone, 30% are using email, and 20% are still using post as a key communications channel. And there's very low usage overall of social media and of the use of mobile apps for communication. If we look at the UK specifically, we're seeing that actually there's slightly more of a preference for email than there would be for the European average. So in the UK, 39% are reporting to hear from their dealer via email, 28% on the telephone, and still 20% via post. So if we continue that online dating analogy, what we're kind of thinking here is that it's a bit like maybe posting a love letter to somebody only to find out they've either moved house or they're potentially on Tinder. So there's a real opportunity here to think about what are the communication channels that your customer would like to be communicated with, perhaps rather than sort of doing what we've always done. Because when we look to some of the new and emerging markets, we're starting to see a very different experience when it comes to the digital channels. So it's closer to 10% the use of mobile apps and the use of social media in the UAE for communicating with customers. But as we look across to China, the use of social media and of mobile applications actually plays a very significant role in how they communicate with their consumers. We find here that specifically the use of the WeChat platform, almost a cross between Facebook and Twitter, if you will, plays a very vital role in how all retail businesses are staying in contact with their consumers. And it seems that automotive retailers are absolutely capitalizing on this opportunity as well. Moving on to our third finding, we find that when it comes to purchasing a new car, brand name and brand loyalty may absolutely be king for sales, but not necessarily in the maintenance area. So in this particular section, we asked consumers, where did you buy your latest car from? And then secondly, have you used the maintenance services at the dealer where you bought this car? So let's have a look at what we found here. Regarding brand loyalty for car purchases, 77% of consumers in China bought their car from a franchise dealer. This figure is 60% in the UAE, And in fact, 55% of Europeans purchase from a franchise dealer. So the tendency to purchase from a franchise dealer does drop as you look across these markets. And it drops again when we look at the UK specifically. So in this case, only 50% would purchase from a franchise dealer, or most recently purchased from a franchise dealer. 37% purchased from an independent dealer, and the rest would be other or private sales. But we see a very different story when it comes to after-sales. In China, the brand's name is still very, very important when it comes to having their vehicle serviced, mainly from a reputation and brand loyalty point of view. So 95% of Chinese consumers are returning to the dealer they bought their car from for their servicing and maintenance needs. This figure is also very high in the UAE, where 78% return to where they bought their car from. But it drops down to only 57% in Europe, and indeed only 52% in the UK. We then wanted to understand a little bit more about, once people do come back to the dealership, how satisfied are they with their after-sales experience? So our next key finding was that people are in general very satisfied with their after-sales experience, but of course, perhaps there's still room for improvement, and also is being satisfied enough. So specifically, we asked consumers to rate their satisfaction levels with the vehicle maintenance services they received on a scale of 1 to 5. Now, what we're finding here is, in general, the good news is, whilst there might be a challenge in getting consumers to come back to the workshop, once they are there, the European and Middle East and Chinese dealers are all offering a good level of service, which means that the consumers are happy with the service that they're receiving. So it's 75% are giving at least 4 out of 5 in the UAE, 76% in Europe. But across China, again, this does rise to 86%. So we are seeing a higher level of satisfaction for customers in these markets. And then in the UK specifically as well, we are doing very well in this area. The UK is 76.4% that are rating the service at least 4 or 5 out of 5. Of course, however, that does still mean that up to 1 in 4 consumers is rating it 3 or 5 or less. So there are still opportunities for dealers to take actions that could improve this figure and perhaps move it closer to the Chinese numbers. We then wanted to understand a little bit more about why consumers in the UK may choose other locations for their vehicle servicing. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the primary driver of choosing somewhere else other than the dealer where they purchased their car is they believe they could find a better price elsewhere. Indeed, it was 64% of respondents who rated price as the most important factor to them when selecting their options for vehicle maintenance. The second most important reason was reliability and how much they trusted that garage or workshop. So here, 52% were saying that reputation and reliability of the garage is one of the most important factors to them. To be clear, we asked them to rate 2 or 3 most important factors. And the third one is around the choice of location. So it does benefit them significantly, of course, if they have a location close to where they live or work. And for 31% of our respondents, they were highlighting this as a key factor in choosing their after-sales options. So moving on to our final section then, we wanted to give the dealers an opportunity to respond to some of these findings and really share tips and tricks that they had come up with for making sure that they were offering a good after-sales communication experience to their consumers. So we surveyed, in fact, 12 qualitative interviews from dealers across these 3 markets, the UK, the UAE and China. So let's hear from our UK dealers first on some of the tips that they shared. Firstly, a key point is that they have clearly mapped out the customer journey from an after-sales perspective and all of the key communication touch points that can form part of this. This is something Curtis will take you through a working example shortly in this webinar. Another dealer said that 1 year on from when we bought the car, we make sure to offer them a happy birthday offer, or a carversary, if you like, where they can have a free vehicle health check and wash and back to, of course, restart the conversation. But from that free vehicle health check, we, of course, make notes of all the dates where we would need to follow up for any work that was required to be done. We make sure to automate communications based on key dates, such as service and MOT reminders. And a common theme that came up more than once was that there is no one-size-fits-all for a communication channel. The important thing to do is make a record of how the customer wants to be contacted and make sure to respect their choices. Some said that because customers value convenience, they make sure to open their booking center until 7 p.m. in the evening, because for some people it's difficult to be disturbed at work. And one dealer told us that by far the best response rates come from when they have the data from the car itself. So when we're able to call the customer and say, your service light is on, do you want to book an appointment and come in and see us? So to recap then, the top 3 points we can learn from UK dealers are, first of all, to clearly map your after-sales journey and identify key communication touchpoints with your consumer, automate communications where possible, and make sure to understand the customers and their own individual preferences for communication and respect the choice that they have highlighted. Moving on to the UAE, we see a slightly different strategy here. They tend to make sure to use a combination of phone, but WhatsApp also plays a really heavy role in how they communicate with dealers. In fact, with consumers. In fact, all of the dealers that we spoke to said that WhatsApp was a channel that they used, and they also use social media to stay in contact with customers as well. They also proactively pursue satisfaction surveys for any service that they offer and try and get reviews and feedback. And if any customer wasn't rating the dealer at least 4 stars, the dealer was contacting them immediately to understand what the challenge was and try and do everything they can to keep them satisfied and turn that review around. And they were using social media heavily for sales and showroom offers, but very much starting to use them now as well for their after-sales and maintenance offers as well. So to recap then, the top 3 findings from the UAE dealers was that direct forms of communication are favoured, such as phone, WhatsApp, SMS. They also make sure to pursue positive reviews, and social media forms part of the sales and the after-sales strategy. Last, but certainly by no means least, we see some different tactics in play again in Chinese dealers. So what we were told here is that Chinese dealers will have WeChat accounts for most of their customers and communicate with them via WeChat messages. They offer them, of course, a choice of service dates and then work with them to make an appointment that suits their schedules. So it's very much on the consumer's terms and valuing consumer convenience. They like to contact the client after work or on the weekend, so we don't disturb them at work. But here's where we really see that in China there's a strong focus on relationship building rather than perhaps a strong sales approach. We find out that they organise events, including family events at the dealership. This might include a party for Mercedes owners or the opportunity for children to indeed come and take photos with their Christmas trees. So again, this might not be an approach that would specifically work in the UK, but it's interesting to consider what actions we could take that could focus on building that relationship with customers. Similarly, they also make sure to send customers small birthday gifts and greetings and holiday wishes. Again, Chinese culture focusing very much on that relationship piece. And they're not necessarily large gifts. They might just be small things such as key rings for children, but they say it's an opportunity to let their customer know that they are thinking of them. And they acknowledge that whilst other companies or independent dealers in China may of course be cheaper for maintenance, they always focus their marketing campaigns on the quality of their service that they offer. So to recap then, just looking at what we can learn from Chinese dealers, social media is key for them for engaging with customers. They focus heavily on building rapport and sending birthday and holiday greetings. They like to be creative with opportunities to get customers to physically come back to the dealership and make sure it stays front of mind. And their marketing strategy focuses heavily on the quality of the service provided. So with that in mind, that concludes the section of our quantitative and qualitative research that we wanted to share with you. I'm now going to pass over to Curtis so he can talk to you about how you can build a customer contact journey in your dealership.
Okay, so we've heard some really great stuff there from the research, and we'd like to share with you some of our experiences of working with customers that deliver great customer journey communications. So as we heard, the first thing to really consider is, do you have an effective customer contact journey? Quite often we see that we have contact points with customers, but they're only considered around specific activities like a service reminder, an MOT reminder. So a good tip is to perhaps take some time to step back and consider the customer's position in their journey, and understand that position where practically nearly a third of customers don't hear from retailers again in Europe, and how they can effectively be communicated with in that purchase journey. So our illustration here shows that really from the point of handover, there's a key opportunity to communicate a thank you to the customer, and good examples of that are where we perhaps send out a personalised thank you from a general manager or sales manager, but also tag in the relationship that's going to continue with the after-sales department at that moment in time. Also to consider that all of our sales execs are generally following up with customers, and during the handover process, the customer is totally focused on their new vehicle. And whilst we might be introducing them to the after-sales department, their focus really is in getting out in their new car. So on that follow-up opportunity is just an opportunity for the sales exec to remind the customer about the support that they can gain from their after-sales colleagues. Definitely, there's going to be some element of CSI follow-up. We understand that here in the UK, that's predominantly managed by our OEM partners. However, there's an opportunity there as well to pick up with customers, perhaps look at some of their feedback, and ensure that we have communicated effectively that we're there to support them. A missed area early in the customer relationship is a further introduction to the after-sales department post the handover. So all too often we wait to communicate to the customer about their servicing needs until maybe a year later. But some good examples we've seen is where retailers are sending out a communication from their after-sales departments to the customer, maybe a month after delivery, just to inquire how the car's going, how the experiences have been so far. It's an opportunity to maybe tag in some links to online videos, how-to guides, and also make customers aware of their contact channels back to the after-sales operation. In this way, we're sort of signposting the need for the after-sales relationship in the life cycle of the customer's journey. Again, we'll be doing ongoing sales exec communications with the customer. We've put an example of 6 monthly. That might be staged over, say, a 3 or 4 year period at different times. But a good idea, again, just to ensure that have we considered what the sales execs are saying to the customer or communicating to the customer? Because in the early part of the life cycle, it's less likely to be about a selling opportunity, but more about that continuous relationship. And just maybe the sales exec making sure, you know where to contact our after-sales colleagues. Is there anything I need them to contact you for? And just ensuring you've got those communication channels open. One area that we tend to focus on is either annual or time-driven service reminders and this is driving demand for the workshop. But this is those key points of communication that we really need to look at automation. One key thing to look at here is changes in process. All too often we see that some of these communications, if they're automated, can fail if there's been change of staff, management, personnel, process. It only takes one field in your data not to be updated effectively, and all of a sudden communications aren't going out to customers. So it's a good idea to, even if you've got a communications plan, just to periodically review it and check that communications are going. Tag yourself in. Many of us have our own cars on our own dealer systems. Make sure you're receiving your own communication. We heard a little bit earlier about birthday cards. It is a great opportunity just to acknowledge the annual ownership point for a customer in a sort of less selling way, but add value as well. So a good opportunity to add in seasonal offers and health checks. And we see some really good examples of that with people we work with. And absolutely, definitely look at how you're communicating your deferred work opportunities for health check. it's really, really important that when the health checks are carried out, that the work that's going to be deferred is priced correctly, is set to an appropriate follow-up point, and that there is a clear understanding of who's going to be talking to that customer at that point in time. And it's a great opportunity to, again, look at automating contact with the customer. An email to remind them that they need their tyres or brakes checks won't necessarily sell it, but it will signpost that we're going to be contacting you shortly. And it's a much easier call for a service advisor or a contact centre advisor to make if the customer's had an email a few days before reminding them. And this prevents customers driving off into the independent market. Many of these reminders are distress purchases, as we know, and if we can get to the customer in a timely fashion, offer to check the car again for them, we're going to increase, hopefully, that retention of the customer and the value the customer sees in dealing with us. And then we're going to get along the journey to looking again at sales, perhaps doing a review of the customer, particularly if they bought the car on finance. They might have the need to be contacting the customer because of a future final payment on a personal contract purchase. And it's one thing to consider, how much does the sales department place the value on the after-sales relationship? If we're contacting the customer and we're putting together deals for customers, financial reviews, asking them to consider changing their car, it's a really good idea to have a look at. Are the sales department reinforcing to the customer the importance of the service relationship? You know, are we flagging up that your car is genuinely worth more because it's got a main dealer history? As we know, many of our OEM partners have assured use programs that require us to sell cars only with franchise histories. So there is some real value to this relationship. And all too often we see that it's not necessarily considered as part of the sales journey as well. And then, you know, lastly, there are certain key points in the life cycle of the car where we need to definitely communicate with the customer around MOT, warranties expiring, etc. So again, another great opportunity to look at automating these communications. And then, of course, depending on how long the customer keeps the car, those ongoing review points, just making sure we're tying all of this together. So it's a great idea to perhaps look at all the communications you're doing today, but put them in the framework of that customer's life cycle, their ownership cycle, and just look how appropriately you are communicating, whether it's relevant to the customer at that moment in time, and makes it easy for them to have a great relationship with you.
Thank you, Curtis. So just to conclude then, we're going to summarise with some of the best practices that we would recommend for dealers. So first of all, absolutely make sure to build your own customer contact journey, and make sure not to build it as a one-off or something that was maybe done 3 years ago, but make sure to review it on a regular basis, perhaps at least 12 monthly, so you don't end up with almost leaky bucket syndrome where leads or data might be not correct within your system. It's a really great idea to make sure to use your data to personalise the communications and to be relevant for the consumers. So that might be as simple as personalising the communication based on the need that they're likely to have coming up, whether it's a winter health check or something that was identified as part of deferred work. But it's also really important to be relevant. So we've recently partnered with eDynamics to make sure that the MOT data within the DMS can make sure to be accurate, and we're not perhaps sending customers an SMS reminder for to have an MOT for the vehicle they've already sold. Make sure to work smarter with automation, so anything that can be automated in your contact journey should be, because that's going to mean that at least you're guaranteeing that your consumers are hearing from you. And find opportunities maybe to delight customers or give them something that they don't expect. Be transparent with pricing, use video and photos to really reinforce trust and make sure that the customer really understands the value of the service that you're offering. And lastly, it really is an opportunity now with the changing technology and the times that we find ourselves in to consider new channels of communication. You're probably very used to promoting your sales offers maybe on Facebook, but have you thought about putting offers for winter health checks or specific servicing needs on your social media channels? These can all be considered as ways to market, which can of course have a value. That concludes our presentation today. So we'd like to first of all thank you for joining us here, and we are now happy to take any questions if Tim would like to pose them to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Curtis, and welcome, Paul, also joining us for the Q&A. So we've had a few questions come in already, but there is still time to add more. So please, if there's anything you want to ask, do type it into that question box. So to start with, it's more a comment than a question, in fact. Somebody suggests that with respect to Amber work, it is very effective for the service advisor to make the booking for the next check of the item at the point of handover. And the service advisor has already built a trust relationship with the customer to be and so is in a strong position to book the revisit. What's your kind of view on that? Would you agree with that statement?
It's Curtis here. Yeah, 100%. I would agree with that. It's a really great way to do it. One thing to consider where we've worked with customers that do that is obviously an automation of a reminder for that booking, because you are booking sometime in advance if you're doing deferred work or next service opportunity. Life's busy and people tend to forget that they've made these appointments. So just ensure that you've got some kind of automation of a communication 3 to 4 weeks out from that date, just to remind the customer that they've got an existing booking and that if they need to amend it, change it, then there's a contact point for that. But it's a really great suggestion, absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Curtis. Quick question for you, Michelle, regarding the research results. Someone just queried, did that relate to franchise dealers and independents, or is it franchise dealer only?
So we published in the slides in general where we were talking about what percentage purchased from a franchise dealer and what percentage purchased from an independent. But to be clear, the question was framed at whether you bought from a franchise or an independent dealer, how likely were you to return to that dealer? But if there is a specific interest in breaking that data down by franchise dealer and by independent dealer, then we can probably look to supply that as a data point afterwards, by all means.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Another question coming here about what generally, I guess this is UK specific, what are consumers' preferences on how they book appointments? Is it still traditionally kind of over the phone, or do they prefer online appointments now? How?
I think the one thing that was consistent throughout the research is there is no longer really a one-size-fits-all. Across all the markets, they were saying it's important to understand the consumers' preferences. There are plenty of places you could capture that, either in the DMS or whatever software you're using, and then really respect that. Because I think if the main thing for dealers is to put yourself in the shoes of the person you're talking to. Some people can, of course, answer the telephone at work. For some people, it's not, remotely possible. Some people are really good on email, but not necessarily available to answer the phone. For some people, SMS works great for something as simple as a booking reminder to make sure that you don't forget that booking. And from a dealer's perspective, you're not risking the no-show within the workshop. But I think the one thing I've really taken from this research is to understand what works for that consumer and try wherever possible to stick to that. But Curtis, any further insights?
I think, I specifically work within the UK market, and where we work with our customers, we still see a heavy reliance on telephone for booking. However, that is shifting to online. And I think some of the challenge with online is the customer feeling that they've actually made a booking, that they've not just had an automated response. So where we see really good examples is where there's personalised response to the customer after the online booking's been made. And I think that encourages the customer to believe that it's all working and that next time they'll book online again. And another thing that we've seen some of our customers use to their advantage is chat. So where they've got contact centres that are there to take telephone calls and they're able to capture the bookings on the phone, they've also got people on hand to be able to man chat portals. And it's really just a different way of talking to somebody rather than picking up a handset and verbally communicating. Chat is a way that people are becoming increasingly more used to using, and it's a great way to be able to talk to the customer and construct a booking at the same time. So I think there is a shift towards online and other channels, and it's something we should all be looking at. But at the moment, there is still quite a heavy reliance on sort of telephone bookings, customers phoning in. But I think we've just got to make it easier for consumers to realise that there are other channels that they can get to us on, and they are reliable.
Okay, thank you, Curtis. Questions are flooding in now. But there's a couple on a similar theme. Where has it gone? Somebody's just kind of asking, I think this was mentioned earlier, Michelle, but what percentage of customers felt price was the most important aspect of choosing a garage? And also a second kind of question along a similar line, with price being important, then how can dealers promote the value of the services they provide rather than purely the price?
So the figure was 62% across Europe that were rating, in the UK, that were rating price as the most important factor. I think when you're constructing a marketing campaign, there are many different angles you can look at it. There will, of course, be some people who will value the opportunity to take the cheapest option. But equally, there are going to be people who will value convenience. So can you, is there anything you can do to make a service experience more convenient for them? Or also, I think it's very important to be able to highlight the value of having your car service at a main dealer. So a bit like Curtis was mentioning, that can, of course, impact the resale value of the car itself if you have a full main dealer service history. So a bit like they're saying in China, that can you focus your marketing campaigns on quality of service? Can you focus your marketing campaigns on convenience or the quality of the experience? And of course, if Curtis or Paul have anything they would like to add to that, again, with their time that they spend within UK dealers.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that, Michelle, at all. I think focusing on the quality of the dealership experience. So it's not just the work that's carried out, it's the environment as well. So you've got the option for courtesy cars, for lifts to and from. You've got the customer lounge experience. Many dealers now will offer plug-in points, free Wi-Fi, so you can do while you wait servicing. So it's building your marketing around that experience rather than focusing on the price point.
I think for me as well, we mentioned it in the customer journey, it's a bit of a challenge, but to really understand whether the sales department, when they're talking to the customer about the purchase of the car, are placing the value on the retailer history or the fact that they've looked after the car themselves. Just referencing it in the part exchange process just adds value. It makes the customer think, well, I'm glad I had the car serviced here. And it's interesting sometimes when we go and work with our customers, we ask, do you mention the value of the service history? And typically it's not normally considered. So it's another way of looking at it.
Okay, thank you. Another question here. Is the general advice you would give that it's best to start the conversation about after sales with customers on the day they buy the car, or should it be at a later point between the purchase and the first service?
I think for me, it's definitely something we need to signpost on the handover. I think we probably need to understand where the customer is when they're purchasing. It's all about the excitement of changing the car, and but there's a moment in the handover where we're going through the understanding of the new vehicle, the understanding of the servicing requirements, and how we can help you with that. So there's a big part to be played on handover, and handover experience is the bit that the customer really does value and remember the most in the selling journey. The salespeople remember the sale, but the customer always remembers the handover and picking their new car up. So it's a real opportunity to signpost that after sales opportunity. But also, as we said earlier, a follow-up to that, probably a month down the line, well thought through, with the after-sales team showing an interest in the customer's ownership of the car, perhaps offering up some driver tips or some ownership tips. That's a good opportunity to just reinforce very, very early in that ownership cycle for the customer that we're here to help you, look after you, and we're really interested in you. I think that adds value where we see customers do that well.
And further to that, I guess, what impact would you say service plans have had on dealers' after-sales fortunes?
I think our service plans are great. They're a great retention tool. They possibly have a little bit of a value impact, because if we don't pay for something, it's free. We don't necessarily consider the value. So that there's an element of, it's great to be able to say to the customer, great, your costs all been covered today. It's being charged to your service plan. But there's an opportunity for service advisors there to just remind the customer, if you were paying for that today, the menu price for that job would have been X £100. So it's a good opportunity to remind them the value of the service plan. Key thing is to think about when the service plan ends. If a retailer is selling a service plan, then typically that we see there's a good follow-up at the end to try and sort of either re-solicit the sale of the future plan or the change of the car. But if it's offered by the manufacturer as a sort of incentive to buy the car in the first place with 2 free services, then quite often that it can fall off the radar at the end, and the customer gets the shock of then having to pay for service. So, but they're definitely a great retention tool.
There's quite a pointed question here. In fact, do you think the rise of service plans has created complacency in service advisors or even sales executives in terms of selling the benefits of franchised after sales?
I think it's definitely a danger. It comes back to that point a minute ago. As a consumer, if I've got a service plan on my car, when I go in to have it serviced, it's great not to have to pay the bill. But if nobody reminds me the cost of what I've just had done, it's very easy just to not value what's been done at all. So yeah, I think that's, as much as a question, it's a really good observation. It's something to definitely consider, that when you've sold a service plan, that we still reinforce the value that plan is providing, and all of the goods and services the customer receives for either the upfront payment for the plan or the monthly payment they're paying.
Okay, and continuing the service plan theme, a couple of people have asked whether you have any insights into what China and the UAE do themselves in terms of service plans. Do they offer service plans? Do they sell them quite successfully?
That wasn't something that's included in the research, but it's something that we could certainly ask anecdotally to dealers and see what we can find out about as a further point. That's a really valid idea that we could certainly look into.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. One here: do you think after-sales opportunity is lost due to a need for staff training?
Well, I'll jump in there. Yeah, very definitely. Service operations are amongst the busiest operations in the retailer, and it's really difficult to bring somebody on board them and train them well. I think the key for us when we're working with customers is, do you have a properly defined process? It's much easier to train people or bring them on board them into your business if your process is defined and if you've got those key touch points. But definitely, if unfortunately at times we've had to recruit as an emergency measure, bring somebody on board, perhaps they've got some existing skill sets which can work against us at times. They know how to use the systems, they've come from a competitor franchise, and they bring their own skills to it, which is great, but they don't necessarily follow our processes or understand what we need to do. So I think if you can spend the time to just consider the process and the key things you need to get across to new starters or existing members of staff, that it can definitely aid that. Absolutely.
I think it's important to really consider the value of the data that's in your customer database as well. So are you training new people who come on board, or even reminding existing people to be mining the data within your CRM to identify all those consumers that do have amber work, which is either or even red work that needs follow-up, and what processes are you putting in place to make sure that those revenue opportunities aren't lost?
Okay, thank you. I think we've got time for another couple of brief questions, then we'll have to wrap up. Perhaps any questions that we haven't got time to cover in this, we can send across to you, and perhaps you'd write a guest opinion piece or something like that to be published, just to kind of so you can respond to those specifically.
If we've made a note of a couple, that's fine. So we'll make a note of any more that come through.
Okay, fantastic. We have, in your opinion, do customers with service plans spend more on work identified during a VHC because they've had to spend nothing on the actual service during the day?
I suppose to answer that one, it would be a bit anecdotal without doing some proper data analysis. I would say there's a good opportunity that the customer is more likely to spend on say, a highlighted red work opportunity because they haven't got the overall cost of paying for the service. It's either been budgeted or prepaid. But I think you're still only likely to capture that sale if you position it correctly. I don't think we can become complacent just because the customer's having a free service that they will spend more with us. I think that the process should be about explaining properly why there's a need for the work, explaining the value of the work and positioning it correctly. And then whether they've got a service plan or not, hopefully you'll secure the sale.
I guess, as you say, if they see the need and perceive the value, then they'll want it done, won't they? And certainly the convenience of having it done as opposed to going away and sort of exploring their options.
Yes.
Okay. So final question then. Obviously the contrast or slight kind of contrast in after-sales retention between the UK and Europe and China. Somebody's questioned whether the hurdle of GDPR has an impact on the success of customer communications here in contrast to China.
I think that might be almost a bit of a leap, because although there's not necessarily the same level of data protection laws, in those markets, I think it's still about understanding the quality of your database. So if at the point where you've sold a car, you're making sure to ask somebody, have they opted in to receive your email communications? And of course, GDPR still doesn't preclude you from being able to call somebody and inquire after the health of their vehicle or offer them the opportunity to bring it back. So again, it's not a data point that we have referenced or researched, but I think the most important message here is to properly map out your customer communication experience and make sure that you are getting people to opt in. And then really they should be happy to hear from you. In many ways, GDPR could almost be considered a bit of an opportunity to make sure that you are communicating with customers how they want to be communicated with and using the channel that suits them, and that they said they're happy to hear from you.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up there. I'd like to say a big thank you to Michelle, Curtis and Paul from CDK Global for the presentation today. Viewers, I'm sure you've had plenty to go away and think about. If you do wish to view it again, you will have access. It will be published. The link will stay published on AM Online, so please do view it at your leisure. And a huge thank you to the audience for joining us today and taking interest in the consumer focus on after sales. There will be more webinars coming up in coming months, so keep an eye on AM Online for those. So finally, thank you all for listening and goodbye. Thank you.
Tim, may we very quickly just say that if anybody wishes to read the associated white paper with all the research, it is actually live on the news section of our website, www.cdkglobal.co.uk, just in case they have further questions or want to review the stats we've shared.
Okay, perfect. That's fine. We can put a link through from the link for the webinar as well.
That would be lovely. Thank you so much, Tim.
Okay, thanks everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.
you. Well done.